Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Cut Rate Commander, the series where we build commander decks without breaking the bank. As usual, this is your host Grazzet, and today we'll be brewing an increased but still budget build featuring the main protagonist from Final Fantasy XIII, Lightning Army of One. But before we continue, please do consider liking, commenting, and subscribing if you enjoy this content, and if you really like it, also consider supporting the channel directly either through my Buy Me a Coffee to help keep me caffeinated, or through my Game Nerds affiliate link to net me those sweet kickbacks for any purchases made through them to help fuel my caffeine addiction that way, both in the description below. Also, be sure to stick around until the end of the video to see which commander won last week's poll, and which ones you'll be voting for next to have a build of their own. Now, with all that chilling out of the way, let's kick off this deck tech by taking a deeper look at its commander and how we're going to be building around them. Lightning Army of One is a 3/2 human soldier that costs 1 and Boros, has built-in First Strike, Trample, and Lifelink, and the following ability. Whenever she deals combat damage to a player, until our next turn, if a source would deal damage to that player or any permanent that player controls, it deals double that damage instead. Taking a closer look at the strengths our commander brings to the table, the most impactful by far is her ability to double our damage output against any opponent that she's able to deal damage to. Now, while it is true that, under normal circumstances, she doesn't get to benefit from her own damage amplification, this limitation is more than made up for by the fact that not only do all our non-first striking creatures get to deal double damage against that unfortunate opponent and their blockers, but so do any other sources of damage they take for an entire rotation, which includes but is not limited to subsequent attacks made from any other opponent at the table, direct damage and burn sources from, again, anyone at the table, and even their own pain lands and other self-damaging effects. And then, to make this already powerful effect even more powerful, this damage amplification can stack with itself, meaning that if we're able to get Lightning to inflict combat damage more than once on our turn, through effects like Double Strike or additional combat phases, we can quadruple, octuple, and further exponentially augment that damage amplification to make them even more vulnerable to subsequent damage. This then combined with her cheap cost and myriad of built-in keywords allowing her to hit the board quickly and reliably crash through blockers to apply her damage amplification, while simultaneously padding our life totals in the process, we're left with a commander who, if properly supported, is more than capable of ending the game out of nowhere. This terrifying capability, however, does not come without its cost, as our opponents are certainly not going to risk being on the receiving end of that extra damage, and will most likely try to remove Lightning on sight in order to prevent that from happening. And even if they aren't able to remove her outright, her low base stats mean she's going to have a hard time attacking into more established boards without going down herself, meaning we'll need to invest heavily in ways for her to become a harder hitting as well as resilient threat in order for us to make the most out of her effect before our opponents can properly defend themselves against it. So, seeing as our commander's damage amplification becomes exponentially better the more time she's able to get in for damage on our turn, and that she needs higher stats and protection to be able to get in for that damage more reliably, I opted to take this build in an equipment and extra combats focused direction, with both offering Lightning a plethora of means to stack her effect via double strike granting and being able to attack more often, which work even better when combined, and the equipment package not only providing Lightning with the stats and keywords she'll be needing to get in for damage faster, hit harder when she connects, and prevent our opponents from removing her, but whose internal synergy lets us easily pad our core stats while it does so for added consistency, giving us a final build that can hit hard, that can hit fast, and that can knock out players out of the game before they even know what hit them. So let us make our way into the world of Final Fantasy XIII and follow its protagonist, Claire Farron, otherwise known as Lightning. Whether she was stopping the mythical beast Ragnarok from obliterating the cocoon and the people within it, saving the timeline from the machinations of the immortal Chaos Ballad, or becoming the literal savior of humanity in the face of Armageddon, Lightning has risen to meet each new challenge, standing her ground with gunblade in hand against mortal foes, forces of nature, and even the gods themselves to protect those dear to her, defying fate and relentlessly moving forward against insurmountable odds, all for the sake of a better world. So, now that we know a bit more about our commander and the game plan for this deck, let's start looking at the deck itself by starting with the ways we'll be using to exponentially grow Lightning's damage amplification. Starting things off with a variety of ways we'll be granting Lightning, and to a lesser extent, the rest of our creature base double strike to both stack and take advantage of Lightning's damage amplification. We'll begin with a suite of equipment-based sources of it, in the form of Two-Handed Axe, which provides one-time flash speed double strike via its adventure to catch out unsuspecting opponents with, then sticks around as an on-attack power doubler that synergizes perfectly with our extra combat sources to pump Lightning's power into truly insane numbers. Brass Knuckles, which gives us 2 sources of cheap-to-equip double strike for the price of 1 thanks to it creating a token copy of itself on ETB, allowing us to make even more of our creature base more deadly in combat. Grappling Hook, whose compelled blocks turns the equipped creature into a repeatable source of spot removal on top of the extra damage for added disruption. Leyline Axe, which we can get into play for free if we open with it, while also granting the equipped creature trample and a stat bump in addition to the double strike, allowing any of our creature base to punch through blockers more easily. And lastly, Genji Glove, which not only allows Lightning to strike twice, pun intended, but also gives her an additional combat phase to do so again, potentially allowing her to amplify damage against a single opponent by a staggering multiple of 16 all on its own, assuming of course the player hasn't already been eliminated via raw commander damage before that. Then pivoting slightly from equipment that grants double strike and onto equipment payoffs that grant it instead, we'll be adding in the legend Ryev Master Smith as a very cheap way to grant all our equipped creatures double strike as they swing in for more mass double strike granting, along with the class Blacksmith's Talent, which may take a bit of time and mana investment to do the same, but does give us a free piece of equipment to pad our creature stats with, a free equip per turn to save us on mana each turn, and haste in addition to double strike granting so that the equipped creature can swing in as soon as they come down, making it well worth running, and the haste granting being particularly relevant by allowing Lightning to swing in before our opponents have a chance to react. And then to wrap up our double strike granting sources with some more generic entries that are still very good at enabling our commander and or getting extra damage in, we'll be adding in Blade Historian as another way to grant our entire creature base double strike as they swing in for added redundancy, Boros Charm as an instant speed source of double strike when we need the damage on board, or alternatively, as a source of destruction protection for our entire board for added resilience, or targetable burn if we need the extra reach. Duelist's Heritage as a means to grant both our own and our opponent's attacking creatures double strike each turn, incentivizing the rest of the table to attack the opponent that was struck by lightning, again pun intended, if they want to inflict even more extra damage into them. Sunhome Fortress of the Legion as a way for us to grant double strike at instant speed to any creature from the convenience of our land slot. And lastly, Audric Lunarch Marshal, who may not grant double strike on his own, but, so long as any of our creatures have double strike, spreads it across our entire board on every single combat phase, while also doing the same for just about every other evergreen keyword, making him a superb way to grant board-wide flying, trample, and haste as well, so that our entire creature base can get in for damage faster and more reliably. Now, moving on to ways for us to generate extra combat phases so we can swing in even more often with our double striking creatures, we'll begin by making room for the reusable extra combat phase granters, Combat Celebrant, which may only be able to grant us an additional combat phase every other turn due to having to exert itself as it attacks in order to do so, but its high base power making it a superb candidate to grant double strike to so it can survive that attack and be able to grant us extra combat phases later. Portraiser, whose ability to generate additional combat phases on combat damage can potentially generate us 2 combat phases per opponent it connects with when combined with our double strike granting sources, though it should be noted that it only untaps our creatures when it deals damage, meaning that only vigilant creatures or creatures that can otherwise untap themselves can make use of the extra combat phases beyond the first one. And Aki Battle Squad, which functions as an equipment payoff by granting all our modified creatures an additional combat phase for additional synergy with our equipment-heavy game plan. Then, as our only other two repeatable sources of extra combats, we'll be adding in the legends Karlach Fury of Avernus and Aurelia the War Leader, both of which just passively grant us extra combats by us attacking, the former proccing if any of our creatures attack, while also granting our attacking creatures first strike, which is admittedly a bit of a non-bow with lightning since any creatures that swing in alongside her won't benefit from her damage amplification on the first hit, but they will have a much easier time surviving that combat for subsequent attacks later, while the second has to attack herself to grant us the extra combat phase, though her myriad of keywords allowing her to swing in immediately while dodging blockers makes that fairly easy. And finally, wrapping up this category with a pair of one-shot extra combat granters, we'll be running full throttle as an extra 2 combat phases for the price of 1, with the added benefit of untapping all our creatures at the beginning of all combat phases for the remainder of our turn, allowing our entire creature base to benefit from our more restrictive extra combat granting sources, as well as Response and Resurgence, which will be primarily running for the extra combat and AoE First Strike and Vigilance, but we can alternatively use as a piece of spot removal in a pinch if we're more concerned about lightning getting in for damage. So, now that we've gone over all the ways we'll be using to stack Lightning's damage amplification, let's move on to covering the rest of the equipment we'll be suiting her up with while she's applying it. Opening this category with our more value-oriented pieces of equipment, we'll be adding in Gold Vein Pick, Prying Blade, and Beamtown Beatstick, all which function as repeatable ramp sources that combine perfectly with our double strike and extra combat sources thanks to their on-damage treasure generation and offensive stat boosts, with the last one also granting Menace as a source of limited evasion or to at least force the double block, as well as the Reaver Cleaver, which is an even better source of ramp by generating us treasure equal to the damage dealt, allowing our double striking creatures to amass mind-bogglingly large amounts of mana for us every time they connect, and granting them trample and a stat boost on top of that to ensure that any of our creatures can do so reliably. Then moving on to equipment dedicated to generating us repeatable card advantage instead, we'll be making space for the on-damage draw source, Mask of Memory, again combining perfectly with our double strike and extra combats to pitch lands for more playables, along with the on-attack card advantage generators, Storm Beacon Blade, Strength Testing Hammer, and Adaptive Omni Tool, which may not directly benefit from our double strike granting sources, but we can still get extra usage out of via our extra combats. The first providing us with easy to proc draw when we swing in with multiple suited up creatures, and providing a sizable offensive power boost to empower Lightning with. The second letting us draw so long as it's equipped to the most powerful creature at the table, a very easy condition to meet in this build, and grants that creature between a 1 to 6 power increase with every swing to inflict even more damage. And the third not only providing a scalable stat boost that scales off all our artifacts, including our treasures, for a huge spike to our damage output, but also lets us dig for more artifacts with every swing to further enable itself and our game plan. And while on the topic of boosting our creature stats, we'll also be making room for even more power augmenting equipment to ensure that Lightning and the rest of our creature base can hit as hard as possible with their double strikes and extra combats. With our arsenal including Ace's Baseball Bat as a raw +3 power boost and on-attack first strike that we can cheaply equip to Lightning or our 13 other legendary creatures for only a single mana, Nuka-Cola Launcher as another massive power boost, this time also making our creatures unblockable by creatures outside of our colors thanks to Intimidate, and tacking on some free life loss with its rad counter distribution as a bonus, Onaginata for another +3 power boost as well as Trample for more reliable damage, and whose power limitation on equip is easily met by all our other stat boosting equipment and our naturally high power creatures, Hero's Heirloom as a slightly smaller stat boost that makes up for it by also granting any equipped legendary creature trample and haste, giving us yet another way to let Lightning apply her damage amp as soon as she comes down, and lastly, Nettle Cyst, which provides us with another scalable stat boost that scales alongside our artifacts, also counting our enchantments this time for a bit of extra pump, that also brings its own body to equip itself to thanks to Living Weapon, so we can make use of that huge stat block as soon as we cast it. And then to close out our equipment arsenal, we'll be adding in some protection pieces to help keep Lightning and our other high-value creatures alive in the form of Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots, both of which provide cheap targeting protection and haste to get our creatures into combat faster while also keeping them alive, Champion's Helm, which provides more targeting protection and a decent stat boost for our legends to, again, make our commander and a good chunk of our creature base even more dangerous and resilient, Dragonfire Blade, which pumps our creatures even further and whose hexproof, while limited only to mono-colored spells, still provides decent protection against a huge array of common spot removal in our format, and, as our last piece of protection, Celestial Armor, whose flash speed and destructibility granting may only be temporary, but is often enough to dodge most wipes and destruction-based removal on defense, and then sticks around to make Lightning evasive to make her damage amplification even harder to avoid. So, now that we've gone over the equipment we'll be using to suit up our commander and our creature base, let's move on to the equipment support we'll be using to get even more value out of said equipment. Kicking off our equipment payoffs with ways for us to save mana on equip costs, we have the legends Raban, Bull of Alamigo, and Brunir Battlehammer, both of which let us equip our creatures at no mana cost once per turn, the former doing so as he attacks, and whose ward will make our opponents pay in blood if they try to remove him, while the latter does so by simply existing and bolsters all our equipped creatures' power to get even more mileage out of all our double strike and extra combat granting sources, Brass Squire, which we can tap to attach an equipment to any of our creatures at instant speed, functionally turning all our equipment into combat tricks so long as it's untapped, and, of course, Pure Steel Paladin, which not only lets us equip for free on our turn as many times as we want once we have 3+ artifacts in play, but also turns any artifacts we cast or otherwise cheat into play into cantrips for more on-theme card advantage. Now, staying on the on-theme card advantage game plan, the first half of our equipment focus draw package will see us add in the legend Shram Senior Edificer as another repeatable way to turn our equipment into cantrips to help replenish our hands even faster as we build up our board, Mary Esquire of Rohan and Jor Kadeen First Gold Warden as on-attack sources of draw to take advantage of our extra combat phases, the former drawing us a card so long as he swings in alongside one of our 13 other legends and grants himself first strike when equipped with anything for extra survivability in combat, while the latter draws us a card so long as he swings in with at least 4+ power, a task made easier by him increasing his own stats every time he swings in that scales with the number of equipped creatures we have in play, including himself, which allows him to generate more draw and pump every time he swings. And, as our last legendary draw source, Akiri Fearless Voyager, who turns all our equipped creatures into on-attack draw sources, allowing us to draw up to an extra 3 cards per combat phase, and can then use the equipment on our creatures as spot removal protection at 1 mana a pop to help keep our hands topped off and our board state intact. And then to close out our equipment-based draw package as well as our equipment payoffs, we'll be adding in the Equipment Tutors Armored Skyhunter and Rohirrim Chargers, both of which can get equipment from our deck directly into play and onto our creatures every time they swing in at no mana cost, the former allowing us to do so from the top 6 cards of our deck per swing, meaning it can whiff, but makes up for it with its evasive body allowing it to attack in more safely, and by allowing us to attach any equipment it does hit to any of our creatures, while the latter always hits since it reveals cards off the top of the deck until we hit an equipment, but can generally only equip itself and once every other turn due to it needing to exert itself in order to do so, a limitation that our extra combat phases can circumvent since most can untap it outside of our untap step, though obviously both of these entries benefit from extra combats to cheat even more of our equipment into play. So, now that we've gone over all our equipment support, let's close out the game plan specific portion of our game plan by going over some inclusions specifically geared at getting extra usage out of and or enabling Lightning even more. So, in an effort to make lightning just a bit harder for our opponents to interact with, we'll be adding 2 more protection pieces to the build in the form of Bastion Protector, whose passive commander indestructibility granting can protect lightning as soon as she comes down if played before her, and, as a bonus, provides a solid boost to her stats so she can swing in harder, and Restoration Magic, which can protect lightning from targeting and destruction for only a single mana for dirt cheap one-shot protection, but we can scale up to protect our entire board if and when we need to, or alternatively, if we'll be attacking multiple times in a turn into well-established boards and don't want to sustain any casualties ourselves. Then, in order to get Lightning into combat as fast as possible, both to get her damage amplification online faster and narrow the window our opponents have to react to her, we'll be running the enchantment Rising of the Day, which provides AoE haste to get all our creatures swinging faster, as well as a legendary specific power boost to make all our legends including Lightning even deadlier, alongside the lands Flamekin Village and Slayer's Stronghold, both of which can make Lightning hasty from the relative safety of our land slot, with the latter also providing a decent-sized power boost and vigilance for the turn as well. And speaking of lands, we'll also be adding in Rogue's Passage, whose easy-to-grant unblockability is perfect at allowing Lightning to get in and apply her damage amplification even against the most well-established boards. And lastly, as more ways for us to get a bit more usability out of Lightning's damage amplification outside of combat, we'll be slotting in Lightning Bolt and Lightning Helix, both of which we can use as cheap damage-based spot removal as needed, but most often we'll be throwing at our opponents' faces once they've been made vulnerable by lightning for that extra reach. Aurelia Above the Law, whose ability to turn any attacks that any player makes with 3+ or 5+ creatures into draw and burn respectively, not only allow us to generate value off of said attacks, but also allows everyone else at the table to finish off a damage amplified opponent by just flunging with a wide enough board. Gisela Blade of Gold Knight, who gives us access to another damage doubler that's not dependent on combat damage, making Lightning's damage amplification one step better with her mere presence on the battlefield, while also having any damage we take as a bonus, and Kedis Emberclaw Familiar, who, for only 2 mana, allows Lightning to spread any damage she inflicts to one opponent across all our opponents, which may not count as commander damage, but can easily still inflict upwards of 30+ damage to the entire table, proccing her lifelink since she's the one inflicting that damage to either win us the game outright or let us stay in the game long enough to win on subsequent turns. So, now that we've covered all the game plan specific cards in the build, let's wrap up this deck tech by going over our generic core stat pieces as well as our land base. Starting off with our generic ramp pieces, we'll be running the Mana Rocks Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Boros Signet, and Talisman of Conviction, all of which provide excellent mana acceleration and or access to our colors to help speed up and fix our mana base, as well as the on-damage ramp piece Professional Facebreaker, which gives us one last source of on-damage treasure token generation to synergize with our double strike and extra combats, this one also letting us turn our treasures into Impulse Draw if we need the card advantage over the ramp for added flexibility. Then moving directly to our generic removal package, since we won't be running any generic draw in this build, we'll be adding in the permanent removal spells Chaos Warp, Generous Gift, and a Stroke of Midnight, all of which let us deal with almost any type of permanent threats our opponents are able to get on the board, at flash speed as well to clear out any blockers who attempt to intercept Lightning if we have to. And lastly, as the only board wipe we'll be running, we have Blasphemous Act, whose ability to level the board for only a single mana is particularly good here when combined with our haste enablers, leaving the way free and clear for Lightning to come down and swing in without having to deal with blockers. Then quickly going over our mana lands, we have Command Tower, Battlefield Forge, Sunscorched Divide, and Rugged Prairie as untapped access to all our colors to provide consistency as well as speed, Clifftop Retreat and Fury Calm Snarl as typically untapped access to our colors thanks to our basics, Path of Ancestry and Temple of Triumph as a pair of tap lands that make up for their slow speed with their card selection, either as we cast our humans or as it comes down respectively, making them both superb in the early game to help us get to our playmakers or hit our land drops, and lastly, Myriad Landscape as a land-based piece of ramp to help us speed up and fix our mana base just a bit more. And finally, we'll be running 11 plains and 12 mountains as our basics to fill out our land base. So, now that we've covered all the contents of this deck, let's take a look at this build's final breakdown. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 12 sources of double strike and 8 sources of extra combat phases, giving us plenty of ways to exponentially improve Lightning's damage amplification by giving her more opportunities to inflict damage to apply it, 21 ways for us to increase our creature's power, 9 ways for us to grant them evasion or trample, and 8 ways to grant them haste, allowing Lightning, along with the rest of our creature base, to hit harder, faster, and more reliably, 8 sources of targeting and or removal protection, helping us mitigate the removal that's sure to be thrown Lightning's way as a high priority target so she can stick around for longer, and lastly, 24 pieces of equipment and 13 cards that care about equipment, giving the build a solid equipment-based foundation to suit up Lightning and our creature base with while generating us value as we do so. For general deck stats, our final build has 15 ramp sources, 13 card draw sources, 8 removal sources, and 1 board wipe, with our removal being noticeably lower than normal, but this being due to us being more concerned about keeping Lightning alive over removing our opponent's threats, as our opponents will be taking those threats with them once Lightning knocks them out. Looking at our mana curve, we have an average CMC of 3.00, leaving us with a lower mid-weight curve that may be faster than it appears on paper due to all our free equip sources freeing up our mana to cast more spells. The final price of this deck then totals out to be $100.47, not counting the price of basic lands, taxes, or shipping. This price was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace prices on TCG Player at the time of this recording. Now, if we'd like to make a more budget-friendly version of this build closer in price to the ones I usually make, we can consider replacing the high-priced Reaver Cleaver, Karlach Fury of Avernus, and Aurelia War Leader with the much more reasonably priced Diamond Pickaxe, Scourge of the Throne, and Hellkite Charger, which are obviously more limited than their predecessors, but can still provide on-attack-focused ramp and repeatable combat phases if we're looking to spend less money or if we just want to tone down the deck's power at the table. But if instead we're more interested in increasing this deck's power by pumping more money into it, we can easily augment the build's extra combat potential by swapping out Response and Resurgence, Full Throttle, and Port Raiser in favor of Waves of Aggression, Aggravated Assault, and Hexplate Wallbreaker, all of which provide repeatable sources of extra combat phases, and the last one also fitting into the equipment portion of our game plan quite nicely, and or building up the equipment portion of our game plan by replacing Goldvein Pick, Celestial Armor, and Nuka-Cola Launcher with Sword of the Animist for more reliable and repeatable land-based ramp, Hammer of Nazan as additional protection and yet another source of free equips, and Buster Sword as more on-damage ramp and value, though honestly you can slot in any of the Swords of into this build to generate even more mileage out of their effects. Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. Taking a look at the results of last week's poll, it looks like Vincent Valentine was able to surpass his fellow mono-colored commanders, so look forward to a build featuring him coming soon. Then moving on to this week's poll, we'll be giving some of the commanders, as suggested by you in the comments, a chance at a build of their own. Those being the Enchantress-themed Terra Magical Adept, the Wheel on a Body Clive Ifrit's Dominant, the Artifact Reanimating Noctis Prince of Lucis, and the Artifact Creature Recurring Golbez Crystal Collector. So be sure to cast your vote in the Community tab, link in the description, before the deadline on July 18th, and continue to let me know in the comments who you voted for and which commanders from this set you'd like to see me feature in future polls. And before we go, as usual, please do like, comment, and subscribe to help keep the almighty algorithm appeased. Consider donating to my Buy Me a Coffee or buying product through my Game Nerds affiliate link if you want to throw a few bucks my way so I can keep making this content. And if you enjoy content like this, be sure to check out all my other deck techs either floating around my head or on the playlist above. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.